Good day and welcome to the audience on YouTube, panelists on Zoom, and my colleagues. This is the eighth webinar in our monthly webinar series. For those who are new to Anekdhara, I'll give you a quick overview about Anekdhara, and then we'll go on to the topic of the day, Sardar Patel. How well do we know him? Anekdhara was set up by a group of retired civil servants as a forum to discuss various issues in public policy. The forum's aim is to encourage discussion and discourse on various topical issues in a systematic manner. The focus is on a nuanced understanding of the complexities of the issues vis-a-vis the situation and its perceptions, juxtaposed with facts. Our approach is to keep away from the deeply disturbing discordance seen on TV channels and in social media and focus on informed debate, discussion, and exchange of ideas by involving experts on the topic. With this, now we'll go on to our main topic of webinar today, that is Sardar Patel and how well do we know him. Sardar was a towering personality during the freedom struggle starting from 1917 and a loyal follower of Mahatma Gandhi. His experimentation using Satyagraha as a tool of protest at Bardoli was so eminently successful that Sarojini Naidu remarked that Patel translated Gandhi's teachings into practical, dynamic action. Bardoli Satyagraha also disturbed the British government to such an extent that a correspondent of Times of India, then a pro-government paper, was forced to describe Sardar Patel as Lenin of India and that he had instituted a Bolshevik regime in Bardoli. Mind you, the British then were terrorized by Bolshevism, a popular epithet for Russian Revolution of 1917. In addition to these hesitational approaches, Sardar Patel helped Congress to evolve into a well-knit organization. First at the regional level in Gujarat as head of Gujarat Congress Committee and later at the All India level. Sardar's contribution to the making of modern India, especially during the short 3-year period of 1947 to 50, could be discerned from the epithets that he had received, such as Iron Man of India, Mahatma's Muscle Man, and Chanakya cum Bismarck of India. As the first Home Minister and Deputy Prime Minister of India, his insight, wisdom, and diplomacy was evident in his strategies to build a united India. Thus, Sardar Patel helped integration of principal states and many other contributions, including the restructuring of the bureaucracy. However, Sardar Patel also had a lot of differences with the various leaders at various different times. Differences with Nehru are well known, and those with Subhash may be little less known. We will be all knowing about them. He was also criticized by various leaders in the Congress Socialist Party, a small group within the Congress, as being conservative. More importantly, down the years, from 1970s, the increasing sycophancy of Congress ignored most of the freedom fighters, including Patel, in favor of the ruling family. At the same time, RSS and BJP attempted to own Sardar Patel, a person instrumental in banning RSS after Mahatma Gandhi's assassination, and the efforts led to the commissioning of world's tallest statue. And the RSS and BJP team has also projected as if Sardar Patel was historically wrong person by spreading off-truths such as stating that Gandhi snatched the prime ministership from Patel in 1947 and handed it over to Nehru. It is in this context we are organizing this webinar to understand more about Sardar Patel and his thought and his contribution to making of India. We have now before us two eminent speakers, Professor Pushpesh Pant and Professor Rajmohan Gandhi. First, Professor Pushpesh Pant will be talking, and then followed by Professor Rajmohan Gandhi, and then followed by a detailed question answer session as posed by the audience. Now, Professor Pushpesh Pant was born in 1946 in Nainital. He was homeschooled and went on to college in Nainital, studied history, international relations, and law at Agra University, and also at Indian School of International Studies, Delhi University. Taught at Delhi University and JNU for 4 decades and retired as Dean of School of International Studies of JNU. He is acknowledged as one of the leading experts on international relations as well as in Indian cuisine, and as a columnist has written a number of major publications like Forbes, Open, Outlook, Times of India, and Tribune. His book, India the Cookbook, was named by New York Times as one of the best cookbooks of the year. In addition to that, he has also written a number of books on various topics covering international travel, international relations, and tourism. in addition to the books on cuisine. Professor Pant also featured in Raja Rasoy or Anya Kahaniya, a critically acclaimed Indian television series on Indian cuisine available on the Epic channel. The series gives inside look into the royal kitchens and explores the history of behind the cuisine of Indian royals. Government of India awarded him the Padma Shri in 2016. Over to you, sir, Pushpesh Pant. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, Ravi. I'm deeply humbled. And actually, the way you have introduced me makes it very clear to the audience how utterly, totally unqualified I am to participate in this discussion. I studied history long years back, did not follow it up with any academic scholarship in the field of history. And what little I know of Patel, I must say I said yes to your invitation immediately because I was deeply humbled when I knew that I was going to speak in the same webinar where my favorite biographer, Professor Rajmohan Gandhi, was going to speak. I'm here primarily in a capacity as a listener because I think what little I know of Sardar Patel is when I encountered Rajmohan Bhai's brilliant biography on Patel, which I had the good fortune of reviewing for Hindu at one time. And I think, but let's begin at the beginning. I was born in a small town in the hills. And when I first heard of Patel, it was my father. I was aged about 8 then. My father was shaving. There was something very upsetting on the news, whatever, something had agitated him. And he cursed Nehru and said, had Patel been there, this would not have been there. The country would not be going through this mess. This is sometime in the middle 50s. I was about 8 or 9 years old. And this is much before the Tibet thing had blown up, the Chinese-Indian confrontation had taken place. So this was something else. It probably was food adulteration. It probably was black marketing. It probably was indiscipline. And my father, who had served the British, who was not a supporter of the freedom fighting the team, but he felt that something had gone wrong somewhere and the wrong man had been put at the helm of the Indian polity. Now, that is the first I heard of Patel. When I heard this, and my mother was born in Kathiawar, she had very good Gujarat connections, and Gandhi was a Gujarati, Patel was a Gujarati, her local guardian was Kulpati Kanhaiyalal Maniklal Munshi, and she and her mother talked in Kathiawadi. But surprisingly, she talked of Patel. So I don't remember my mother talking of Patel, which I found a little odd. My father would think in terms of Patel, who would have been the ideal leader for India, post-independence India, and he was not the only one. Others had the same feeling. But then what happened is that many years passed. What amused me, intrigued me at that time was that there were calendars, and the calendar art was very popular. So there were calendars which showed Mahatma Gandhi, they showed Netaji Subhash Bose, they showed Sardar Bhagat Singh. Not one of them showed Patel, and Patel probably was somewhere in the background, if at all, in one of these calendars. Same about the portraits, pictures displayed in the recreation clubs, offices, etc. Many years passed, and I came down to Delhi. And when I came to Delhi, I started studying international relations. I could not avoid reading about Sino-Indian conflict, about Tibet, the problem of Tibet. And then I was working under a very insightful, brilliant professor, Shishir Gupta, who told me, why don't you look up Patel's correspondence, which V. Shankar has just edited and has come out. When I saw that, I realized that how unfairly Patel had been dealt in this Nehru-Patel comparison, which my father, as a layman, he was a doctor by profession, did not know much about anything else besides his practice of medicine. But then I think a person like him was concerned about what was happening in the country, and the enigma of Patel continued, and people compared Nehru with Patel. And when they compared Nehru with Patel, the idea was that Patel, as you said in your introduction, was a conservative person. He was a machine-like person. He was the Iron Man of India. He was the Bismarck of India. He was the strong man of India. And all these clichatic descriptions, I think, do great injustice to Sardar Patel. It is much later that I realized that there were two Patels, Vittalbhai Patel and Vallabhbhai Patel. And Sardar was Vallabhbhai Patel, and Vittalbhai Patel has settled abroad. And he also had a very distinguished role to play in the freedom struggle. He was much closer to Subhash. At one time, he had bequeathed his major part of his property to Subhash to use for propagating the cause of Indian independence abroad. But all that came later. Going back to this correspondence, I realized that, I think, unfortunately, the Paheli of Patel, enigma of Patel, continues despite all these 6.5 decades of my occasional interactions with Patel and Patel's literature, that he did not leave behind some kind of a selected work, collected works, dozens of volumes, or an autobiography, or something like a discovery of India, or like even a bunch of old letters. So what we have is these few letters, official telegrams, which are put together by Vishankar, his PA, and you work backwards and you say that, look, what was his greatest role? He made India one. There is a title of our latest biography which rehashes most of the earlier scholarship, including Rajmohan Bhai's, into saying that Patel, the man who saved India. So if you deify a man and then the myth becomes larger than the man, and you are hardly in a position to understand what he meant. And again, you see, the point is not only the RSS propaganda. I hate to be in a position where I'm defending something, may appear as defending something which RSS says, but it is a matter of fact. It is not a creation of RSS's imagination that majority of people wanted Patel to be the prime minister. They had not voted for except one, I believe, or for Pandit Nehru. So it was a legitimate zenith of the career which should have come to him, which was denied to him because Mahatma Gandhi wanted Nehru to be the prime minister with good reason. Now, interestingly, Patel never complained because he probably realized that he was an old man, he was an infirm man, and he did not want to leave the country midstream without able leadership. So this contrast between Nehru and him, Nehru, the sophisticated aesthete, Sardar Patel, the robust, rustic man. If Gandhi and Nehru are the good cops, Sardar Patel is the bad cop. He is ruthless. Patel can be quoted against himself. He says, look, I'm not a Mahatma. I have to raise funds for Mahatma. So I raise funds for industrialists, which there is a Birla correspondence which brings this out. And then there is something like that he is projected as a man who had no emotions, no feelings, no nothing, which intrigued me. Then I decided to, and that's where I came across biographies of Patel, and then I came to Rajmohan Bhai's biography, which lets the man emerge. But the problem remains because Patel himself was a man of two worlds, and people who lived around him did not leave documentation of the hagiographic variety which is available for the Nehru clan. And I think, as you rightly said, that after the Nehru family started ruling, nobody else seemed to matter. And Patel had died, Sardar Patel had died soon after independence, hardly 3 years, 3.5 years. Now, and he was a sick man even much before that. So what always puzzled me was that here was Patel, who was just 6 or 7 years younger than Mahatma Gandhi, who had become a major political leader in Congress party before Mahatma Gandhi had come as a gust of fresh air from South Africa. Nobody can deny the great role played by Mahatma Gandhi. But this doesn't mean that this Badi Lakir, like the Akbar Birbal ki kahani ki Badi Lakir, dwarfs all other lines. When I read about what Sardar Patel was doing as a chairman of the municipality, a man of extraordinary courage, what he did during the time of the floods, during the time of the plague at great personal risk, the way he took on the senior ICS civil servants who were put in charge of the municipality. And he was a brilliant lawyer as well. And then this robust, rustic Patel comes out in a different light altogether. We forget that he had also studied abroad. He also had been exposed to the international affairs which were taking place. Nehru could have taken short home trips and gone back. This is not again to say that, but this again I'm owing to Professor Shishir Gupta, who made me realize that Nehru was not the only man who had an independent worldview. Sardar Patel thought about these issues, and not only that, Subhash thought about these issues, and also Maulana Azad in his way thought about these issues. Chakravarti Rajgopalachari was a wise old man who had tradition and very, very contemporary mental outlook also. So I do think that this injustice to Patel is because we fall into this trap. He is the Iron Man, he is an emotionless man, he has no empathy, he does what Gandhi tells him. He, of course, Sardar Patel himself admits, I'm not a leader, I'm a soldier. But even a soldier does not obey unjust, illegal orders, and we don't have to be reminded of the Nuremberg tribunal for this. There is a Paksh of Dharma from the Mahabharat's time to present day. And I think Rajmohan Bhai has another brilliant book where he talks in terms of revenge and reconciliation and the Indian Muslim mind. I think Sardar Patel has to be seen in the light of a tradition where an old man is not a conservative man is not necessarily a bad thing. He provides a balance and a ballast to change which might sweep us our feet. And I think when you said that the British were very worried and they thought he was the Lenin of India, it is ironical because I think from Jallianwala Bagh to the formation of the Congress governments in 35, 37, 37 onwards, we have this Patel as a very, very interesting countervailing force where he is also advising Gandhi not only to be totally swept by his quest for God, truth, and spiritual quest, and Chauri Chaura and the withdrawal of the Satyagraha, and then trying to do things on his own. Kheda and Bardoli Satyagrahas are great. I think the other interesting thing about Sardar Patel is that this was purely accidental. A couple of years back, on the 150th anniversary of Bapu's birth, I was working on a small book on Bapu's food that Bapu ate. And I came across some very interesting sections translated from Mahadev Bhai Desai's diary, where they were together in a jail in 1930, where Mahadev Bhai, when he came to the jail, was surprised to find that um, he was advised very politely, very gently by Sardar. He was not drinking tea. He was given to his bed tea in the morning. He said, if Bapu doesn't have tea, how can I have tea? So Sardar, who was fond of some tasty food, had given up salt, was going to bicarbonate of soda, was eating what Bapu was doing. Part of it was his gastrointestinal troubles, but part of it was the deference to Bapu. Now, he was not very much younger than Bapu. He was much older than Jawaharlal Nehru. And if you compare the other prison diaries of how people were worried about what they were eating, what was coming from home, the bottles of honey were being broken down, the tea was Mahatma Maulana Azad had run a riot act to a jailer that why was tea being served in an aluminum kettle, why should there be a tea set, porcelain china tea set. You see the greatness of Patel. He could adjust to the jail life, defer to what Mahatma's discipline was without being a killjoy. So again, I mean, what he was a great bridge player, but he was not asking that set a room apart where I play bridge. When he had converted, he had not gone into a loincloth, but he had gone into a peasant's dress, an Indian peasant's dress, and he was like that. But to confuse Patel as a rustic, rural chieftain of the Patidars would be to doing him a grave injustice. I also think that, when you did talk about the tallest statue, I think when we make a statue, we idolize the man and we shift the focus from his human foils, his qualities, to something which we say, अरे वो तो देवता आदमी थे, वो इतनी उनकी बड़ी ऊंची मूर्त थी, उन्होंने हिंदुस्तान को जितना बचाना था, बचा लिया, and things of that kind. The story, of course, is a fascinating one, how he made the princely states of India assimilate into the Indian Union. But I think he had very little time afterwards to contribute towards what he did during the freedom struggle. I do think that the enigma of Patel deserves to be unraveled by going back to what went into making of Sardar Patel's mind. It is no question saying that he was a nude self-sacrifice all the time, letting his scholarship be used by his elder brother, not show any emotion when his daughter died when he was arguing a case, and not show any disappointment when he was denied the Congress presidency or the prime ministership, or when he was accused of being sympathetic to the Hindu revivalist cause when he said, I would rebuild the temple of Somnath. So let's look at the man and his times and not judge him by what we think are the standards of secularism, gender bias, etc. today. I mean, Moneyman complains that he never had time for me. And I never knew what father's love was. But he never, even when she was sick, asked for her release or advised her not to do so. So his sacrifices for the freedom struggle are no less than anybody else's. I think what has caused all this confusion is that right after India became independence, the focus shifted to partition, the communal riots, and he was the home minister. And then, of course, the INA trials in Red Fort. So Subhash Bose was the center of the focus and had become a martyr of the moment. And this is what had allowed Nehru to pick up his barrister's robe and plead the case. And we tend to forget the real Sardar Patel in all this. I mean, that's all I have to say. I am really here to listen to Rajmohan Bhai, and I'm deeply humbled and very much honored that you considered that I should be part of the same body.
Thank you, Professor Pushpesh Pant. That's very short and brief, quick exposition on Patel and his as a person, how he was instead of looking at various policies or thoughts that he had. And that's a quick, good overview how he rose from being a small person, from a small village to being a tall, one of the tall leaders of independent India. Thank you very much, sir. Now we go over to Professor Rajmohan Gandhi. A brief introduction about Professor Rajmohan Gandhi. Professor Rajmohan Gandhi is a historian, biographer, and activist for human rights and reconciliation. Professor Gandhi currently serves as a research professor at the College of Education, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. He has been teaching at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign from 1997. Before teaching at the University of Illinois, he served as research professor with New Delhi think tank of Center for Policy Research. From 85 to 87, he edited the daily Indian Express in Chennai. During emergency, 75 to 77, he was active for democratic rights personally and through the weekly journal Himmat, published in Bombay from 1964 to 1981, of which he was the chief editor. He was also played various roles in different capacities in different organizations. That's the more important and interesting thing. In the Indian History Congress in December 2017, Professor Rajmohan Gandhi served as the president of Contemporary History at the 78th session in Calcutta, and he was represented. He was in the member of the Indian Parliament from 1990 to July 92, elected to the Rajya Sabha. He also participated in the UN Human Rights Commission in 1990, where he led India's delegation to the UN. Similarly, initiatives of Change International. He served as the president of the worldwide NGO of this NGO. He was also a recipient of various honors, of which his biography of Gandhi received the Indian History Congress's Biennial Award in 2007. In 2002, he received Sahitya Academy Award for his Rajaji, A Life, a biography of Chakravarti Rajagopalachari. Other honors include honorary doctorates from Michigan State University, Guru Nanak Dev University, Liverpool Hope University, University of Calgary, and Oberlin University. He has authored a number of books whose listing is 14, so I'll briefly summarize them. It includes a series of various biographies on Rajaji, Mahatma Gandhi, and Patel, and also various histories of various regions like Punjab and modern South India, history from 17th century to our times, and various other books. In addition, he has, in addition to his book on Sardarji, what he writes in the preface of the book, I'll just read out of his interest in Sardar Patel. This is with reference to whether Gandhi was unfair to Rajaji when he was being when he nominated or he chose Nehru as the prime minister. Professor Rajmohan writes in the preface, the opinion of some that the Mahatma had been less than fair to Vallabhbhai was a factor in my decision to attempt to write the latter's life. If a wrong had been perpetrated, some reparation from one of the Mahatma's grandsons would be in order. In addition, I seek to discharge the obligation of a citizen to a founder of his nation. So that's how he finds his cause for writing this book. And incidentally, I don't know whether Professor Rajmohan would like it. Professor Rajmohan Gandhi is grandson of Mahatma Gandhi and also Rajagopalachari. Sir, over to you, sir. Thank you for accepting our invite.
Very glad to be with everyone. And thank you, Pushpesh, for your comments. And if I repeat some points that he has made, please forgive me because I missed out the last 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So, one thing to know about him is his early life. He was the middle son, and he himself has spoken about this, that the older children got importance, the younger children got affection, and he was the son number 4. And there were 5 sons, and then there was a daughter. And so this meant that he had to struggle early on in life. Also interesting that, unlike his brothers, who all got wives from elite. So anyway, I will speak, and I hope that I'm being viewed. But anyway, I'll continue.
You are visible, sir. You are visible. Everything is fine. So continue,
okay.
Sir.
Okay. So also in his early years, there was this interesting, you might say, not clash, but a disagreement with his father. His father was devoted to some religious gurus, and Vallabhbhai Patel, as a young man, was not interested in all that. But then he nonetheless helped his father, who wanted Vallabhbhai to get one of these religious gurus spared from police. I'm talking about this 1908, 1909, when Vallabhbhai Patel is just a successful young lawyer, and his father wanted him to help out to save one of the religious gurus from police action. This is well before freedom movement. And now this, as Pushpesh Bhai mentioned, he had this older brother who was a very successful lawyer too. But this story is worth knowing, which tells us about Vallabhbhai Patel, the man. So these brothers, Vittal Bhai Patel, who was a few years older than Vallabhbhai, and Vallabhbhai were practicing in the same city, Borsad, in the Kheda district of Gujarat. And Vallabhbhai Patel, they were living in separate homes. And Vittal Bhai Patel was a successful lawyer there, and Vallabhbhai was also getting to be a successful lawyer. And he had been very careful, very frugal, very hardworking. He had saved some money, and he had sent a letter to Thomas Cook and Son, which is a travel agent. I'm not talking again about 1909, 1910, that kind of period. And Vallabhbhai Patel writes to Thomas Cook and Son and says, please send me a passport, arrange a passport for me. Please arrange my ticket to England. I want to study law. So Thomas Cook and Son sends a lifafa, an envelope, with a ticket, sea voyage ticket from India to England and also a passport. And however, this letter, the postman takes to the house of the older brother, because both of them have the same name, V.J. Patel. Vittal Bhai Jhaver Bhai Patel, Vallabhbhai Jhaver Bhai Patel. And Vittal Bhai, the older brother, gets this letter, opens it, finds a ticket, finds a passport. Oh, you young brother want to go to England before me? No, the older brother has the right to go. I will go. I will use your passport. Now, I wasn't able to investigate fully, but it appears that in 1909 or so, passports didn't necessarily have photographs. And Vittal Bhai said to the younger brother, or rather Vallabhbhai said to him, well, all right, you may go, but the birth date is mine. No, I'll manage that somehow. So Vittal Bhai Patel went to England on Vallabhbhai Patel's ticket, Vallabhbhai's passport, came back, and a few years later, Vallabhbhai also went at a somewhat older age and did brilliantly at the Barrett Law exams in London, came back. But this is an example of his willingness to sacrifice, to step aside for somebody else, which he had to do again and again, and he cheerfully did it. And of course, his wife dies early while he's practicing law, and that's a sad story. His wife, Jhaver Bhai, dies with these two children, Mani Ben and Daya Bhai. I think the Bardoli mentioned, huge Bardoli peasants movement, which 1927-28, which was already mentioned in the introduction. And he appeared as a leader of the farmers, of the workers, peasants. And as somebody mentioned, for some time, the British thought here is some kind of Lenin organizing the peasants of India. But of course, Vallabhbhai was born in the family of small peasant proprietors. He wasn't an agricultural laborer. He was a small farmer. His father, over years, had become somewhat impoverished. And this was a large family, so he wasn't rich, but his family owned some land. Another thing that people are not aware of in Vallabhbhai Patel's life is his role in the famous 1931 resolution of the Congress, the Fundamental Rights Resolution. And people rightly associate that resolution with Jawaharlal Nehru and with Gandhi. These two played a very large role in drafting that resolution, which said that future free, this is 1931. This was a meeting in Karachi in 1931. And the Fundamental Rights Resolution said that the future of India, in the future, there will be complete liberty of thought, and there would be equality, and all religions would be protected. Vallabhbhai Patel at that time was the president of the Indian National Congress in 1931 at this session. And he was totally and completely party to the Fundamental Rights Resolution, liberty, equality. This too is worth noting. This major resolution, which had actually quite a role also in the future constitution, of course, that was made much later in the 1940s. Another thing that people are perhaps not aware of is Vallabhbhai's very clear understanding of fascism and his opposition to it. And this comes across very clearly in the diaries of Mahadev Desai. Now, in 1932-33, Gandhi was in prison, Patel was in prison, Mahadev Desai was in prison, in the same prison. And Mahadev Desai wrote a diary of that period in which he describes the conversations between Gandhi and Patel. And these are fascinating conversations. And by this time, Mussolini has already risen in Europe. And Patel's scathing remarks about Mussolini. And he also says that the British are actually following the same pattern as Mussolini. But those diaries of Mahadev Desai reveal Vallabhbhai Patel's opposition to fascism in the early 1930s. Another aspect of Vallabhbhai Patel's life that is not well known to most people is his role between 42 and 45. His role with Quit India is quite well known. Vallabhbhai Patel was an amazing organizer of Quit India movement, although he wasn't enthusiastic about it to begin with. But soon he became convinced of it, and he played a very great role, even though he was already quite unwell at this time. He was arrested, and as many are aware, many Congress leaders, including Maulana Azad, who was then the president, Jawaharlal Nehru, Vallabhbhai Patel, Govind Vallabh Pant, Acharya Kripalani, and some others, Pattabhi Sitaramaiah of Andhra Pradesh. So they were all in Ahmednagar Fort, Maharashtra, for 3 years. And Vallabhbhai Patel's role there, which comes across not because, as Pushpesh Bhai told us, Vallabhbhai Patel hardly wrote about himself. Hardly spoke about himself. So we have to learn about him entirely from the correspondence and interviews, conversations with other people, which are available from different sources about this Ahmednagar time from 42 to 45. And here Vallabhbhai Patel emerges as a wonderful gardener. There are two gardeners among these leaders in Ahmednagar. Jawaharlal Nehru, who's actually even a better gardener, but Vallabhbhai Patel is a fabulous gardener. And then he, through his wit and his humor, he maintains the morale of everybody. And Pattabhi Sitaramaiah, who writes a book called Feathers and Stones, in which he describes this period in Ahmednagar, says that the newspapers, eventually, to begin with, newspapers were not allowed. They were kept completely, you might say, cut off from India. Eventually, newspapers were allowed. And since Maulana Azad was the president, the newspapers, 2 or 3, first went to him. Then they went to Patel, and then to Jawaharlal Nehru. This was their arrangement. And according to Pattabhi Sitaramaiah, the man who read every single column inch of the newspaper and remembered everything he read very carefully was Vallabhbhai Patel. Anyway, now I want to say one or two things that Pushpesh mentioned. Now, before I say this, because I'm going to disagree with him a little bit. But, you know, at the moment, much of the discussion about Patel is connected to controversies. Should he have been prime minister rather than Nehru? And all those are very important questions. But I think before we discuss the controversies involving whether it's Gandhi, Subhash Bose, Nehru, Patel, and any others, we need to know, as far as possible, each person. We need to understand Sardar Patel's life fully and Nehru's life before we discuss these controversies. But on this end, and you know, this perhaps one of the most important controversies is about Patel being deprived of what was seen as his due, the prime ministership of India. Now, my study of that period gives a different picture. So in 46, in April of 46, a new Congress president had to be chosen. And there was the process of choosing it had been started a few months earlier, at the end of 45. And the procedure of choosing the Congress president then was that various Pradesh Congress committees would suggest a name and would nominate somebody. And if there were 2 or 3 or 4, there could be a contest. Or if they agreed among themselves and some people withdrew, so they could be unanimous. Or Gandhiji would say, let's have X rather than Y. And most people at that time said, all right, we will accept Gandhiji's view. So in April of 46, the date had come to select, and 2 or 3 names had been proposed, including Patel's name, including Kripalani's name. But nobody had proposed Nehru's name. And Maulana Azad, who had had this continuous term from 1940 because of Quit India, he remained Congress president for 6 years. But he too was willing, although nobody had proposed his name, willing to continue for another year. But Gandhiji intervened at that stage, as is there in my book, of course. And he advised Patel to withdraw his name. He advised Kripalani to withdraw his name. These two withdrew their names. And then Nehru's name was proposed at the last minute, and he was elected as Congress president. Now, this is absolutely true, so that Gandhi advised Patel to withdraw. But what did he advise Patel to withdraw from? There was no question in April 46 of Prime Ministership of India. India's independence had not yet been decided. The cabinet mission had just arrived. Mountbatten was a year into the future. No date was fixed for independence. It was not even clear that there would be independence. Yes, there would be negotiations about the future. So Gandhi definitely intervened and made sure that Nehru would be the president of the Congress. And Patel willingly stepped aside. But there was no suggestion. There was certainly no vote among the people of India at that time or later that who should be the Prime Minister of India, and people wanted Patel, and Gandhi said, no, Nehru should be. ऐसा तो बिल्कुल नहीं हुआ. ऐसा तो हुआ ही नहीं. Prime Ministership का स्वयं सवाल ही नहीं था. And Dwarka Prasad Mishra, who was one of the Congress presidents who had proposed Patel's name, one of the provincial Congress presidents from, at that time, Mahakoshal, part of Madhya Pradesh later, he said, we had proposed Vallabhbhai Patel's name for presidentship because Jawaharlal Nehru had been Congress president 3 times. Subhash Bose had been Congress president twice. Vallabhbhai Patel had only been Congress president once, and now he's a very senior leader. We wanted him to be Congress president again. So my study of that, all the papers of that period, I'm not talking about later arguments. My study of that period reveals absolutely no demand by anybody. And now I'm talking from 46 and 47. August 15, 47 is when Free India's first government is formed. There is no discussion or debate. There is not even a single Gujarati newspaper writes, why has Nehru been made Prime Minister rather than Patel? The people of India want him. So when Pushpesh ji says that the people of India wanted Patel to be Prime Minister and not Nehru, usme mujhe koi historical record nahi dikhta hai. There is no such, and I have looked for it. Was there any criticism, any questioning, either when Nehru became president or a year later when Nehru became Prime Minister, that why has Patel been pushed aside? And it isn't as if everybody was silent. People were speaking out on all kinds of matters very freely, and Gandhiji was being criticized quite freely even at that time. But at that time, there was no national wish or demand. And Jawaharlal Nehru afterwards, yes, he became quite unpopular. But in 45, 46, 47, 48, Jawaharlal Nehru was amazingly popular. We may feel that the people of India were foolish to be in love with him, that they were in error to be in love with him, but they were in love with him. So when Jawaharlal became Prime Minister and Vallabhbhai Patel became Deputy Prime Minister, there was no national disappointment or criticism. So this is now other people may discover from the files of 45, 46, 47 that there was some kind of silent or even half open or open unhappiness at Nehru being made. लेकिन मुझे उसका कोई भी evidence बिल्कुल नहीं मिला है. So it is worth realizing that later controversies very often influence our understanding of what might have happened in earlier periods. And I think this I want to quote here. So after Gandhiji was assassinated, and there was a demand, Jayaprakash Narayan made the demand, and other people also wrote in the letters to the editor newspapers that Sardar Patel is the Home Minister and he should resign. He could not protect Gandhiji's life. And Patel felt there was something in it. So he wrote to Jawaharlal Nehru saying that I want to resign. This has happened and I should resign. He did not immediately post the letter. He wanted to wait for a few hours. So before he had posted the letter, this is the letter that he received from Jawaharlal Nehru, 3rd February. My dear Vallabhbhai, with Bapu's death, we have to face a different and more difficult world. I've been greatly distressed by the persistence of whispers about you and me, magnifying out of all proportion any differences we may have. We must put an end to this mischief, he continues, Nehru. For over a quarter century, you and I have faced many storms and perils together. In this crisis we now face, I think it is my duty, and if I may venture to say yours also, for us to face it together as friends and colleagues, not merely superficially, but in full loyalty to one another and with confidence in one another, unquote. And this is what Vallabhbhai replied, quote, I am deeply touched, indeed overwhelmed by your letter. We have been lifelong comrades, the paramount interests of our country and our mutual love and regard. Our mutual love and regard, transcending such differences of outlook and temperament as existed, have held us together. I had the good fortune to have a last talk with Bapu for over an hour just before his death. His opinion also binds us both, unquote. So witnessing, this is my comment now, witnessing sharp conflicts, but also overcoming them, Nehru and Patel, their partnership, until Patel's death in December 1950, enabled the enactment of a constitution assuring equal rights to all Indians and the merger of princely states into the Union of India. Now, this is something that is following what I'm going to say now. In February of 49, Patel is speaking to Congress workers in Bengaluru, and this is he discusses this idea of Hindu Raj, and he calls it that mad idea. And this is in the Hindustan Times of 26th February, 1949. Now, some of you will remember that there was a very important cabinet minister in the early years of India's freedom called Narhari Vishnu Gadgil, N.V. Gadgil from Maharashtra. His son was afterwards also quite an active Congress leader in later years. And Patel and Gadgil were very close. And of course, they were sharp Patel-Nehru differences, not only over Tibet, but over many issues. So in December 1950, Patel is in Delhi, but he's very ill. And in those days, At least Patel and his friends felt that he would get better treatment in Bombay than in Delhi. So he was flown in a special aircraft for treatment to Bombay. But he was quite unwell. And at the airport, and this is what he told Gadgil: "Make me a promise. Whatever your differences with Panditji, don't leave him," unquote. And Gadgil wrote a book called Government from Inside. And some of you may have come across this book. It was published, I think, in the 1960s by Meenakshi Publishers in Meerut. N.V. Gadgil's book. And he says that in his final days, of course, within 3 days of arrival in Bombay, Patel died, December 15. But he asked one of his very close colleagues, "Make me a promise, whatever your differences with Panditji, don't leave him." And this also, I don't know whether Pushpesh has mentioned it, because if so, I should be forgiven for repeating it, but I think it is important to note. This is from his secretary's book, V. Shankar's book, one of his books, Reminiscences. And he describes Vallabhbhai Patel's, one of his last speeches. This was on October 2 of 1950, just 2 months before he died. He was in Indore. And this is what Vallabhbhai Patel says, quote, "Today, I see before me the whole picture of life ever since I joined Bapu's army. Bapu gave life to a dead country. Ba, Kasturba, lent him a helping hand. We were all soldiers in their camp. I've been referred to as the Deputy Prime Minister. I never think of myself in these terms. Jawaharlal Nehru is our leader. Bapu appointed him as his successor. It is the duty of all Bapu's soldiers to carry out his bequest. I'm not a disloyal soldier. I'm just satisfied where I am and where Bapu posted me." Now, within 10 weeks, he would die, but I want to say this. Whatever else Patel was, whatever great qualities or weaknesses he may have had, he never said anything that he did not mean. He did not have to say, who did he wish to please? Do we want to demean Patel by saying that he said all these things to please Nehru, to please the media? No. Vallabhbhai Patel would never. He was so blunt, and all these diaries of Mahadev Desai and Mandiben Patel's diary, which has the scathing comments from Vallabhbhai Patel about X, Y, and Z. He was candid. He would never have said that he wanted to be absolutely loyal to Nehru if he did not mean it. So I think I will stop with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your, of course, beautiful narration of the thoughts and events in critical periods of history, backed up by complete evidence in terms of the correspondence or quotations or statements. That's the indication of a great scholarship and also ability to communicate a lot with the public. With this, now we'll go on to the question answer session, sir. So there are questions, quite a few questions which have come onto the podium. Either Professor Pushpesh or you or both of you can address them as per what you deem it as relevant, this one. So first question is, Professor Pushpesh said, "Old man Patel was a countervailing force despite being a conservative. As a disciplined soldier and ardent follower of Gandhiji, he accepted the decision of Gandhiji and became second in command. Where is injustice here for Patel?" And there is a sense of injustice for Patel that is being circulated.
I don't think so. I don't think that it was implied by me or by anybody that there was an injustice done to Patel. When Patel, first of all, see the two things I want to make clear. When I'm suggesting that Patel was denied the prime ministership, I'm not saying that there was a great surge of support for him among the Indian people. But I would submit in all humility that by 1946 it was not as if India's independence was going to be delayed for eternity. The INA had jolted the British. The British were defeated in a very enfeebled power. They were willing to withdraw from this place. There was the Royal Indian Naval Mutiny. So I don't think that it would be fair to say that Indian independence was not even on the horizon. So anybody who became the Congress president would be in a position of advantage when it came to being considered for future leadership roles in parliament, leader of the parliamentary party, etc. I would not suggest that, what I was mentioning was that my first encounter with Patel's presence or his stature was when my father was grumbling about Patel would have been a better prime minister. I was not suggesting that the rest of the India wanted Patel to be prime minister immediately, or there was a Gallup poll kind of a thing. No, not at all. I don't think that there is any implication in what I said, that Patel was unjustly treated. Patel accepted to be in second in command, follow Mahatma Gandhi as a loyal soldier, and said that he would not do that. So I think that is what should be understood very clearly. I mean, what I said, that when you say Patel is conservative, in these times you try to posit somebody who's a modern and a conservative. I do not think that the conservative is a word of abuse. There are times when a conservative is a countervailing force to a more impetuous Nehru. Say, for instance, in 1931, or even a Congress Socialist Party. So the problems with Mahatma Gandhi were CSP also. Subhash Bose, Forward Bloc, the kind of Jayaprakash Narayan, Ram Manohar Lohia, all of whom walked out of the Congress Party soon after the independence. So it is not as if that there was no dissenting voice at all. Those dissenting voices may not be in favor of Sardar Patel as a prime minister, but these dissenting voices were powerful voices, including D.P. Mishra, which Professor Rajmohan Gandhi pointed out so acutely, aptly, had cogently argued why they wanted Sardar Patel to be the president at this juncture.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir. Professor Rajmohan, would you like to add anything to what Professor Pant said? So you have to unmute yourself, sir. So keep your mic unmuted because there will be a lot of questions being asked.
No, I don't have to add anything that Pushpesh ji has said. He has answered it very clearly.
Thank you, sir. Next question first draws quotes from an extract from Sardar Patel's letter, and it reads, contrary to the impression created by some interested persons, we have worked together as lifelong friends and colleagues, adjusting ourselves to each other's point of view as the occasion demanded and valuing each other's advice as only those who have confidence in each other can. So is the rift then mostly played up by the right wing in India, or is a rift was genuine? I'm just adding the last phrase.
So I would say there were very strong differences.
Yes.
But rift is an inaccurate word. The differences never rose to the level of a rift or a split. And these differences on many issues were settled, sometimes amicably, sometimes after some time, but they were settled and they remained loyal to each other. And it is when the questioner says that is this a line that is spread by certain groups? That is correct. If you look at the contemporary history from the standpoint of those times, you find that despite very strong differences, they worked together as a wonderful team.
Thank you, sir.
Professor Pant, would you like to add anything?
No, I think it's very well explained by Professor Rajmohan Gandhi. They worked as a team. There was a strong differences among them, but they had a vision of India which they shared. And when Patel says in one of his speeches that, I don't want my life's work to be ruined by dissensions and what could be called a rift of that kind at all. What Professor Rajmohan Gandhi quoted from his conversation with Mr. Gadgil Sr. amply brings that out, that Patel knew that to have India of his dreams, if I may borrow the phrase from somebody else's book, it was necessary for Nehru and him to work together.
Thank you, sir. Another question about ban on RSS. Sardar knows about the perils of fascism. True. but he lifted the ban on RSS without his conditions fulfilled fully, especially in spirit. As a hardcore pragmatist, had not Patel known this strategy of RSS?
Those are important questions, but we should not judge politicians or political leaders of any time with the wisdom, information, knowledge that subsequent generations have gathered. At that time, yes, even though his conditions were not fully met by the RSS, he agreed to lift the ban. Nehru also agreed that the ban should be lifted. It wasn't just Patel. If all of us or some of us are now unhappy that the RSS was allowed to become so strong, we are entitled to our unhappiness. But we shouldn't want that retrospectively, that Vallabhbhai Patel should have done something at some stage so that later problems could have been less for all of us. I again go back to the point I had made, that our preoccupation with today's controversies should not blind us to an objective study of all the characters of that time.
So just an addendum to the question, later Professor Pant also can answer. Patel said Hindu Raj is a mad idea, but by being soft, despite being outwardly tough with RSS, has he not really sowed the seeds of this madness? And another continuation question, sir. What are the views of Patel on RSS and Hindu Rashtra? All these are a communal angle to the views of Patel on the communalism and in general, and with RSS and Hindu Rashtra in particular.
Pushpesh ji?
नहीं, मेरे ख्याल में, you know what we are tending to miss is that Professor Rajmohan Gandhi made it very clear that he was against fascism from the beginning, against Mussolini very hardcore, and the inspiration of RSS was from Hedgewar's time, the fascists and the Nazis. So Patel's sympathy with the RSS is a canard which has been spread for no reason whatsoever. And I would agree entirely with Professor Rajmohan Gandhi that you can't have the advantage of hindsight and say that he should have had the foresight 20 years down the line, 40 years down the line, and to see what RSS would do and what RSS would turn out to be, a Frankenstein's monster. Now, the problem is that communalism is not only the creation of one organization. It is, unfortunately, this organization has harnessed the latent communalism lying dormant in our society and made havoc with it. Now, Sardar Patel could not have known this. Please remember, this was 47, 48, 49. Influx of refugees was there. He was trying to keep the country together. Kashmir's ascension had to be secured. Rehabilitation of refugees had to be there. Law and order had to be restored. Communal riots had to be controlled. So once this priority was done, then he probably would have addressed, and he did persist that the RSS change in the constitution, bring clauses into it about elections and so on. He succeeded to a large extent in that also. But he did not have all the time in the world to control this demon of communalism all single-handedly. No, and why do we realize that at that time there were 565 princely states which were not necessarily entirely secular, which were feudal, which were fomenting all kinds of obscurantist ideas. The monarchs would do anything, the princes, not really monarchs. But let's not forget this. And let's not forget that at that time, it was very difficult for one person to do everything.
Thank you, sir. Professor Rajmohan, would you like to add anything?
No.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Question specifically to Professor Rajmohan, sir. It states, you wrote, historians believe that one of the Patel's key achievements was the building of cohesion and trust among the different castes and communities which had been divided along socio-economic lines. Belief, opinion, and interpretation are different from facts. What enduring legacy has Sardar left in building of cohesion and trust among different castes and communities? Could you please elucidate? Basically, the questioner wants to know what are the various acts he did for building the cohesion between castes and communities.
very important question. But before I attempt to answer it, I will make a humble request to all of us who are participating. We should not expect any leader today, whether in this party or that party, to somehow solve most of our problems. And it is even less fair to expect somebody who died 72 years ago to have played a large part in solving our problems. The problems of our society, the divisions between castes, the harsh relations between castes, the domineering attitude of some castes, the oppression by some castes over other castes, these are realities today. And these are realities all of us have to face, in my humble opinion. We should not spend too much time on how Gandhi or Nehru or Patel or X or Y or Z could have done more to reduce these problems. Although the question is a good one to ask, what was his attitude towards caste and caste relations? So I would say in the context of his time, it was a very, almost a radical attitude. And those of you who know about Gujarat know very well of the great differences between the Patels, the Patidars, and the Dalits of various kinds, and also other castes who are not Dalits, but who are also, quote unquote, backward or low castes. And Patel wholeheartedly led a revolution to reduce the gap and to bring the Dalits, of course, those days they were called Harijans, and the Patidars and the others in Gujarat together. He played quite a heroic part. I wouldn't say that removal of these caste hierarchies became a passion with him. But in his time, in the atmosphere of that time, he played a very great part. Had he not played a great part, there would have been a very strong resistance to whatever happened later. So his early steps may not appear to us to be radical enough, but they were steps in the right direction and they were courageous steps.
Thank you, sir. There's another question which involves Ambedkar, Patel, their relationships. Apart from the doors, even the windows of the Constituent Assembly are closed to Dr. Ambedkar. Let us see how he enters into the Constituent Assembly. Patel is said to have told, but without the questioner did not give any evidence of who said that. Later, Rajendra Prasad wrote to B.G. Kher to elect Ambedkar immediately so that he would attend the Constituent Assembly session commencing from the 14th July. What would have caused this volte-face of Congress? So basically,
Patel. No, I understand.
Yes, sir.
I understand.
Yes, sir.
I understand the question.
Yeah. Yes.
So some of you are aware that Dr. Ambedkar entered the Constituent Assembly first from Bengal and with the support of the Muslim League, with the support of Mr. Jinnah. And he entered the Constituent Assembly that way. But then the leaders of the Congress wanted him to stay on. They wanted his abilities to be used. And Nehru and Patel and Gandhi and others also, but chiefly these three, were very keen that Ambedkar should be enlisted. One thing which some may not be aware of, in the well-known Gandhi-Jinnah talks of Bombay, September 1944, before independence and partition, long talks, Gandhi and Jinnah tried to see if they could resolve the differences between the League and the Congress. Both of them referred to Ambedkar's book that had first come out in 1941 called Thoughts on Pakistan, because it had a very objective study of the difficulties involved, the case for partition, the case against partition. It was a scholarly and objective study. And both Gandhi and Jinnah relied on Ambedkar's book during their conversations. So not only Gandhi, but Patel, Nehru also were very acutely aware of Dr. Ambedkar's very great qualities. And so they were very keen. So after Constituent Assembly started before partition. And the Muslim League helped Dr. Ambedkar to enter the first Constituent Assembly. Then, when partition was agreed upon, it was essential to keep him again. And so Sardar Patel asked B.G. Kher, the Chief Minister of Bombay State, to send Vallabhbhai Patel with Congress support. I beg your pardon, to send Dr. Ambedkar with Congress support to the Assembly. So this is the background to the request by Sardar Patel to B.G. Kher to make sure that Dr. Ambedkar enters the Constituent Assembly from what then was the Bombay legislature.
So to continue, sir, just to probe further,
Yeah.
the quote that the person asking the question, is it? Did you come across it anywhere, sir? Where it says Patel cannot enter Ambedkar, Dr. Ambedkar cannot enter Constituent Assembly. Either all windows are closed to him. Did you come across that correspondence or quote anywhere?
No, I don't know, not in those words. And incidentally, if we are serious scholars, if we give a quote, we should say who said it and when he said it and where the quote is found. Otherwise, these are not serious discussions. What I think is implied by that statement is that Dr. Ambedkar, since he was not a member of the Congress party, and he did not then belong to any party which had the capacity at that stage from any legislative council to send him to the Constituent Assembly, a way had to be found because they wanted him and they found the way. So when it is said that all doors and windows were blocked, I think the meaning, at least that is what I take, the meaning is that he had no way to enter it because he did not have any party that was sponsoring him, which had enough strength in legislatures.
Right. So another question is on the integration of princely states. In the Roundtable Conference, Ambedkar reproved the princely states advocating their integration into the future India, long before Patel or any leader. He said most of them were smaller than even districts. In fact, Gandhiji criticized Ambedkar, stating that we should not concern ourselves with the princely states. How do we view these two views juxtaposed to the credit given to Sardar for the integration of the princely states? In addition to this, there is one more question, which I'll combine with this question. The question is, did the princely states get a more liberal privy in the form of, or let me put it, was the new Indian state more liberal in giving privy purses to the princely states compared to what they were due? Can you answer these two questions, sir? Or Professor Pushpesh also?
Yeah, Pushpesh, please try.
No, I think this again is a very confused question. You are juxtaposing position of Ambedkar in 1930 roundtable conferences, comparing it with the integration of Indian states in a totally different post-war situation. And the Indian states, some princely states were not even much larger than districts. They were larger than many countries of Europe combined, like take the Nizam of Hyderabad, or take the other larger states like Jammu and Kashmir. No, I think take the state like Mysore. So it is to generalize sweepingly and putting two totally different time periods. Times change, circumstances change, situations change. And it is not a question of who first thought of doing this. First thought of doing that Indian princely state should be amalgamated into this. You will have to go back to the whole history of subsidiary alliances, paramountcy, the concept of paramountcy, limited sovereignty of Indian princely states, what they shared with the British, what was being offered to them at the time of independence, what was a great rush of having a partition. So this, to come out with very simplistic, sweeping generalizations, I think, as Rajmohan Bhai said, not very fair to a serious discussion. It is not again a question of Ambedkar versus Patel, Patel versus Gandhi, Constituent Assembly. And the Constituent Assembly was not an elected assembly. Constituent Assembly did have people from representing the princely states of India as well. So let's not get mixed up. I mean, even in the NCERT textbook, the unrevised one, the unbounded one, would have enough factual information to ask a more focused question.
Right. Professor Rajmohan, would you like to add anything, sir?
Just one thing that we should bear in mind that Dr. Ambedkar was combined many amazing qualities and personalities. But a very major aspect of his life was his scholarly life. So as a scholar or as an objective student of the situation, he describes things about princely states and what they're like, what they're not like. So an attitude of a scholar at any given time is likely to be different from the attitude of politicians actively engaged in the political process, how we go to the next step. So apart from the fact that what Dr. Ambedkar said in 1930-31 should not be compared with what happened in the 1950s, equally, the scholar Ambedkar's analysis should not be compared with the political moves that X or Y or Z make. That's the only other point I would make.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir. This is just asking for views on a statement. It appears that Nehru was the most popular man after Mahatma, and Sardar was the organization man behind Congress. So they are two facets of Congress, and they cannot be separated from the policy making for the nation. Your thoughts and views on this statement, sir? I think you alluded to them briefly in your talk also.
Is this for me?
For you and both for Pant also, but you can start, sir.
Pushpesh ji, aap pehle aaiye.
You see, I feel very confused about this, sir, with you sitting here, because I think, it's unfair. You remember Nehru's article, which he wrote, Chhatrapati, in Modern Review in 1936, if memory serves me right. He himself said that what kind of popularity he had and what kind of, shall we say, autocratic tendencies he had, and he wanted his countrymen to curb those tendencies. It was an enormously written article, and now everybody knows Nehru wrote it himself. Now, the Nehru's popularity is again, unquestioned, but that also is a systematic image building which started before independence. I mean, how Pandit Motilal Nehru was pushing Gandhi that said, look, the best thing is to make Sardar Patel the president, but if Sardar Patel can't be, then the next person is Jawaharlal Nehru. There was a difference of 16, 17 years of age, experience, etc. So from 27, 28, and I think Nehru's catapulted into this popularity thing. He rides a spotted white stallion to unfold the tricolor with the banks of Ravi. He had a way of words, makes a great thing. But Nehru, before independence, was writing most of his stuff in English, and he had a charisma. But it doesn't say that the other person doesn't have a charisma. The charisma was matched by Subhash Bose. But then you cannot say that Subhash Bose's popularity before the INA, before the war, before the martyrdom matched Jawaharlal Nehru's popularity. So Jawaharlal Nehru edited a newspaper, National Herald. Jawaharlal Nehru was supported by the younger people. He had progressive stance, quote unquote, of the Congress Socialist Party and the leftist one. I think it is worthwhile going back to other people in the freedom struggle, like not only Maulana Azad, but also people talking of nationalism, internationalism, like Rabindranath Tagore. And Rabindranath Tagore was one of the few people who warned Nehru that don't be so starry-eyed after his trip to Soviet Union, and when he had written a series of articles and his participation in the Baku conference, the League Against Imperialism. So I think Nehru was systematically propagated as a person who was a darling of the young Indians. But then again, lots of people were charmed by him, but it doesn't mean that the other people did not have charm, popularity, or charisma. No. I think this again is an advantage of hindsight to say that Nehru was the most popular figure in the freedom struggle.
Right, sir. Thank you. Professor Rajmohan, would you like to add anything, sir?
I think there are two different questions. One is, was Jawaharlal Nehru the darling of large numbers of people? Was he the darling of the intellectuals as well as the masses?
Yes.
So I would say in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s too, the answer to that has to be yes. At that time, the masses as well as the intellectuals, by and large, broadly speaking, to use one of Jawaharlal Nehru's favorite phrases, broadly speaking, these he was very popular. Why he became popular, how he became popular, was there a plan? Pushpesh suggests that father was very keen. Yes, father was very keen. But you know that at that time, when India is not independent, when power is very much in the hands of the British, it is not possible for a group of people to decide to make X or Y popular. A person becomes popular because he or she has some great qualities or connection, ability to connect with the people. So I think, so I would say that how he became popular to me is a different question. Whether he was popular, the answer is absolutely yes, he was at that time.
So question is about, basically Nehru was a popular person and Patel was more an organizational man and building the organization. So they're both taking the Congress together. Is this the right proposition is what the question would be? Is
there again, you know, we have to look at the whole scene. Now in Gujarat, Vallabhbhai Patel was wildly popular. Among the people of Gujarat, he was really very, very popular. They loved him. They knew him. Now, unlike Nehru, Patel did not have the ability to speak either in Hindi or in English the way that Jawaharlal Nehru could. So he had some communication weaknesses. That does not mean that he was only an organization man. People loved him. The peasants of Gujarat and many other people really loved Vallabhbhai Patel. We should not, although the love for Jawaharlal Nehru, all India, maybe at the time, even in Gujarat, may have been greater. That should not be denied. But to dismiss Patel as just an organization man is to miss out on the many-sided qualities of that man.
right. Thanks. Thanks a lot. Another question, sir. What are the thoughts of Patel and other leaders on partition of the country? Popular perception is that Patel was against partition. How correct is it?
I will attempt to answer this. Well, from December 1946, Patel was the most enthusiastic champion of partition in the leadership of the Indian National Congress. From December 1946, Patel was the most enthusiastic champion of the partition of India. And the records are unmistakable and indisputable on this issue. And they are available in some scholarly works. So yes, Patel he felt that the Muslim majority areas, if they detach themselves and become separate, the rest of India will be easier to govern. This was his view, and he advocated passionately for it. And when Gandhiji made his proposal, about which many are aware, that let Jinnah be offered the prime ministership of United India with Congress support, Nehru also opposed it. Rajgopalachari opposed it. But Vallabhbhai Patel was the strongest and the most determined opponent of that policy, of that proposal.
Right. One more question, sir. A lot of credit is given to Sardar Patel for integration of Hyderabad state into India, but equal credit, I perceive, should be given to the rebellion against Nizam organized by the Communist Party. In his book Sundaraya, a prominent leader of the rebellion alleges that Indian state intervened in favor of the Jagirdars and landlords of the region against the poor people. Your views on this, on these thoughts, sir?
After Pushpesh gives his views, I will give mine.
No, I think my views are very simplistic. I think the Communist Party propagating a party line using jargon that Indian state was doing this in interest of a class or a particular person, I think is a gross misunderstanding of what was happening. One can argue and criticize the use of force in Hyderabad state, the police action, but I don't think that it would be fair to say that the Communist Party had much to contribute towards the integration of these states, either in Hyderabad or elsewhere in the Indian Union.
Right, sir.
So my understanding is that the communist movement of the late 40s and early 50s in the Telugu-speaking areas, and including in Nizam's Hyderabad, was a very important movement. And it made a significant difference to the spirit of the people. And it is a movement that deserves to be studied much more. And we know that, I think, if I remember right, Ravi something Reddy won the election.
Ravi Narayan Reddy, sir.
Ravi Narayan Reddy. In 52,
highest
he
majority.
won a huge, more than Jawaharlal Nehru's majority.
Yes.
So we should not underestimate the popularity for some time of the left-led peasants movement in the Telugu-speaking part of southern India. But I think so that is a historical role that should be recognized.
Right, sir. I'll just check if you have any questions on the YouTube left to be answered. Yes, sir. We've covered everything, sir. So we will close the session unless you want to give any last comments, both to Professor Pant and Professor Rajmohan.
No, I think it's been a fascinating interaction, and I go back more interactive, more enriched, and stand corrected on various things. But I would think that the greatest takeaway is that we can't have the advantage of hindsight and judge leaders of past according to what we think our problems are there and they should be solved. The past is another country.
Right. So, Professor Rajmohan, any last?
I would like to underline what Pushpesh has just said, that this pastime that we have of wishing that our past should have improved our situation today is not a luxury that we can afford. Yes, all people make mistakes, and if they'd not made mistakes, things might have been different. Sometimes I've said I've also studied Gandhiji's life to some extent, and I find that many people want that Gandhiji should have solved all the problems of his time and also all the problems of our time. And we want Patel and Nehru or others also to do this. That is, and anyway, but I really welcome and appreciate all of you and your keen interest in history, in current events, public policy, and the fact that all of you are exchanging thoughts and meeting together is to me a very encouraging sign. And this old man at this time needs some encouragement, and he has received some of it today.
Thank you very much, sir, Professor Pushpesh sir and Professor Rajmohan sir. It was wonderful listening to you and talking to you and interacting with you. It is both our audience on the YouTube and we as organizers have gained a lot more in both in some thoughts and more importantly in terms of the attitude and angle in which we should be viewing different events. And also we also thank you for your encouraging words at the end for Anekdhara, and we'll carry forward the spirit. I also thank all the audience that are tuned into the YouTube for repeatedly coming to us and listening to us every month on different topics. And I request all of them to subscribe to us and also join our Telegram channel so that we give you updates regularly. So with this, we close the session, sir. Thank you very much for your wonderful participation, sir. Thanks once again. Next seminar will be on the 31st of July on the status of women and how it has to be improved. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Right.